ago, I was living and preaching in Birmingham. We were young, pretty newly married, and my wife went yard sailing with one of the ladies from church. It was, I think, a Saturday morning, and I popped my headphones in and was working at the dining room table. And I was living in my brother's house because he was in Norway, and I was preaching there while he was gone. And I realized after a while that she had been gone for hours, and I hadn't heard from her. And so I finally, checked my phone at some point and saw there was tornado warnings all around us. I popped my headphones out and sirens were going off, and I was sitting right by this bay window. So I've been around tornadoes quite a bit in Alabama. I've experienced that. Last night was noisy outside my hotel room. But it was interesting. They actually had tornado warnings in my hometown. So it's everywhere. It's all over the place right now. My wife and my mom in her home were also having tornado warnings all the way in Houston, Texas. So I guess it's just a big storm cell going all throughout the country. Good to be with you. I went south on the way here because all these storms, I was going to go through Memphis, but I saw flood warnings and all kinds of things. And so I ended up going through Jackson and rerouted. And so it's been an interesting trip, but I am really looking forward to being here with you for the next few days until Wednesday. This sermon will be a little bit different than some of the others. It's sort of fitting for this timed period. I want to do a little bit more what I guess I would call lecturing, and I want to overwhelm you with some information. It's not something you have to memorize. There'll be no test later on this, but I want to get across an idea, a concept that I think it's pretty pertinent. And for this crowd, I know it's mostly the older crowd. The kids are not in here, but probably parents may be in here, grandparents. Some considerations for the way our world has changed. The way it has changed significantly over the last 15 years or so. And I want to begin our time this morning really reading from Scripture. I want to begin there, and I want to use some concepts and principles that we will then come back to toward the end. And in the middle, just do some work on culture and society and how we need to challenge the thinking of those around us. The series this week is on courageous grace. These two terms seem kind of almost opposed, like there's tension, and that's part of the point. We have to have courage to challenge the thinking of the world, challenge even our own thinking at times, and at the same time, have the compassion of Jesus. See that people are struggling. People among us are struggling. People in the world are struggling. They're looking for answers. And so while we must resist the things of the world and stand against them, at the same time, we have to reach out with the good news, with the gospel, pulling people and drawing people toward he who's been lifted up, toward Christ as the answer. And that's the direction I want us to be heading from now until Wednesday in the various sermons that we're going to work through, these stories of Scripture and how they're going to point us, sometimes to look internally, to look at ourselves, and sometimes to challenge how we look at the world and opposing the things of the world. So we're going to do a little bit of both of those throughout the next few days. Philippians chapter 4, read with me there. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 4 beginning. It says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there isn't anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you." As I look around at our world, our culture, the idea of peace seems greatly absent. I wouldn't describe our political environment as peaceful. I wouldn't describe our social environment around us as peaceful. Peace is absent from almost every quarter of our culture, and yet it is something that people are grasping for, and often it's like trying to grab the wind. It's something they can't do, and they don't know how to do. And I want us to understand that we have the answer. As God's people, Jesus is the answer. In fact, he invites us. This is a concept, a discipleship concept from Matthew 11. He invites us to come to him. Right? If we are weak, if we are burdened, he is the answer. He gives this invitation, and he promises us that he will give us rest for our souls. The Greek term there is psyche. Rest for our psyche. And if there's one thing that I do not see in our world, it is a restful psyche. In fact, it is under attack all around us. Mental health is a huge problem, a growing problem. It already was, and then with the coming of COVID, it just amplified it even more. And it was something that in many ways is just completely neglected in that whole scenario from the very beginning, and yet now we're paying the price as exponential growth of anxiety and depression and suicide rates have now surged even from 2019, and they were already surging before that. And as a culture, we have been deprived of higher thinking. Everything is becoming more and more surface level. We've gone from Socratic type dialogue over the years now to meme wars on social media. Do we see how lame and how superficial that is? How poor the arguments are, how illogical the thinking has become. And as God's people, we need to be committed to good thinking, to commendable type of thinking on good things, as Paul talks about here in Philippians chapter 4. Getting our minds into a stage in which we can think about things in an appropriate way, not just on the surface, not just to prove ourselves right, not just to feel good, which is much of what our culture is struggling with. Rather than facts and truth, it has become about feelings and emotions. That is the answer. It's an empty answer. It's an answer that gives no purpose whatsoever, but is the answer the world gives. And so we need to reject that. And understand what's happening in this process, and it's been happening for quite some time on a philosophical level, is what I've titled the sermon, that is the death of thought. Thinking, good thinking, is not prized anymore. It's not valued. And in fact, everything about what's happening in the world around us, the way we are marketed to, and the way advertising works, and even the way our phones work, which we're going to talk a lot about this morning, is geared to get me and you to not think, in fact. To feel like we don't have to think. We just listen to what we're told, and we're told when to be angry and when to be happy and when to be outraged. And you don't have to think for yourself. And unfortunately, some of this has even found its way into the church. Just be upset because I'm upset and I'm telling you to be upset. You don't need to look this for yourself. And all of this is extremely dangerous. Jean Twenge is a researcher from San Diego State University. She is an expert in generational change. She's been studying this for 30 plus years now. In 2017, she wrote an article, and now a highly valued article. The title's on the screen behind me there. Have smartphones destroyed a generation? And the answer in many ways is yes, as we'll see here in a few minutes. And here I want to give you some of the things that she said, and we're going to quote some things from this article as we work through this concept this morning. She said the impact of these devices, smartphones, tablets, and she's really talking more about that and not classical things like TV. May come back to that here in just a moment. But the impact of these devices goes far beyond the usual concern about curtailed attention spans. The smartphone has radically changed every aspect of teenagers' lives, from social interaction to their mental health. Before I go any further, let me say that this study specifically is on teenagers. But there's ample evidence that all of this affects me and it affects you. It affects adults in many of the same ways. It's just that teen minds are more impressionable. They're still, the frontal lobe is still developing. And so for good reason, we're more worried about how some of these things will impact them and the way that they grow up and the way that's going to then go into their future. But we shouldn't be deceived into thinking adults aren't greatly influenced by all of this as well. So anything I'm saying here, just keep in mind there are ways in which adults are also impacted by this. And if you're among us this morning and you're older and you're not on social media and you don't really use your smartphone very much, maybe you haven't experienced this, but just know the world around you is significantly influenced, and you probably see it, right? I mean, you walk down the street and it looks like a bunch of zombies just staring at their phones. This is the way things have changed. We always had Walkmans. Remember Walkmans? And those Discmans, and maybe if you're walking or running, you kind of awkwardly carry that while you're running. Anybody remember doing that? But we didn't just walk around constantly with earbuds in all day. But now you look at a street, and what do you see? Everybody walking down the street. I'm not saying I'm not guilty, but everybody walking down the street, they've got earbuds in, nobody's interacting, everyone's looking at screens. It has greatly changed our culture and our minds. She goes on, rates of teen depression and suicide have skyrocketed since 2011. It's not an exaggeration to describe iGen. This is the group she is talking about, like 1995 to 2007, somewhere in there. She labels them iGen as being on the brink of the worst mental health crisis in decades. Much of this deterioration can be traced to their phones. Now, she went into the study with not thinking that. She's used to seeing cultural shifts and changes, and she began to see around 2011 and 12 things drastically beginning to change. At the time, she didn't know what it was. And so she dug in and she continued to look, but over time, it became more apparent what the problem was. So keep in mind, over the course of 25 plus years at that point, she had seen wars, she had seen economic recessions, attacks on our country in 9/11, all sorts of drastic things had happened to our country, and every single one of those on the graphs, just a blip, just a little, up and down. And what you're about to see is something much, much more drastic than that. As she began to dig in more and realize what technology was doing, and before I go further on this, let me say I'm not against technology. Technology can do some great things. So this is not just to down technology and say it's all horrible. It can do a lot of good, but also has potential for a lot of evil. And we need to be aware of that in our culture. As she studied more and more, realizing what was actually behind this bore scary results. So I want to show you some of the charts, some of the data, and how this is changing culture in such a huge way. The first of these is that our young people are no longer hanging out with their friends. I remember when I was at Florida College years ago now, there was 3 different dorms, and we all hung out all the time. There was a day, when we first got down there, it was like, get your phone day. Everybody called the phone company, and we got our phones, and then I don't even know who did it anymore. I don't know if it was the school or somebody else put together a little mini phone book, so everybody got their phones, we gave our numbers, and some of the younger ones are like, what are you even talking about? This doesn't even make sense. But we would go through, and then the girls we wanted to call, we could find their number, This is how it worked. And it's interesting. My brother-in-law, who was a few years younger than me, he went down there a few years later. None of that even existed anymore. They all had cell phones. There was no more phone day, no more phone book. And over time, I went to lectures quite a few years. Over time, I saw, just by observation, interaction drop more and more and more. When I first started going down, still had the dorms, and there were cell phones, but there was a whole lot more interaction. One of the last few times I went down, which I haven't gone for quite a few years now, I was in the newer dorms, and I hardly saw anybody. Everybody was in their rooms. I talked to some of the kids. They said they're all in their rooms playing games. They're all on the internet. And I'm not trying to crack on Florida College. This is a ubiquitous thing. It's all over. It's not just that one school. This is culture. It's how culture has shifted to the extent, if you look carefully, you'll notice that 12th graders, that top line, spend less time with their friends now than 8th graders did back in 2005. And you'll see this same pattern continuing on in some of the other data we're going to look at this morning. Not personally a huge fan of the whole dating concept. Kids are going to like each other and they're going to go do things together, and I have my opinions on that. But the data shows some pretty interesting things here, even with the idea of dating. And notice the line here, 2007, that's when iPhones are introduced. By 2012, 50% of teenagers had an iPhone. By 2017, 3/4 of teenagers in a 5,000 teenager study had iPhones in their possession. And I want you to notice how things are falling off a cliff or quickly jumping in all of these charts. Again, notice that 12th graders, this is 2015, things have gotten worse since this. But in 2015, again, they are dating far less than even freshmen, sophomores. This is representative of the reality that young people simply aren't spending time together. They aren't really interested in exercising their independence. This is the next concept. Again, most of us in here cannot understand this slide. I'm with you. The day I turned 15, I wanted my permit. And I planned the day I turned 16 to have my driver test because I wanted to drive by myself as fast as humanly possible. I wanted to be able to go and do my own things and be independent, and some of this has the concept of independence sort of at its core. Young people now just aren't as interested in independence. But most of you probably are surprised by this. Now, it used to be a much higher rate. Look, 80% plus. of kids were getting their license as fast as they could. It was just a cultural phenomenon, right? You turn 16, you get your license, you go get it. And if someone didn't, you'd be kind of surprised. Why? Well, and there may be some reason why they didn't or whatever, but that was not normal. But now it has dropped significantly. This is probably something you have observed, particularly those of you who are parents with teenagers like me. I have a 17-year-old. I see what her friends are doing. Some of her friends, she's 17, going to be 18 later this year. Some of her friends still don't have their permit. And some of the data and some of these interviews and these studies, it's like people are 20, 21, and their parents are still driving them around to their jobs and things like that, and they're not interested. Very strange sort of behavior in terms of the way I grew up, right? It's just different. But it's interesting how thinking has completely changed on all of this. Now, there are some good things that come from some of these sociological changes, and some of them we've noted maybe over the years. Teen pregnancy is down. Alcohol problems are down, right? Some of the problems that come with teenagers getting together and doing things, those things are down. It may not be the greatest reason, though. Obviously, we're happy about sinful things no longer taking place, but the interesting thing about it is that this is happening because these kids just don't spend time together anymore. They're stuck in their rooms looking at phones or on tablets or on computers. And so, yes, of course, not having actual high content, quality human interaction makes a lot of other changes, some of them good, but many of them bad. But here's the most depressing one, it seems to me, and that is, despite the hyperconnectivity of having these devices in which we feel like we are connected to everyone around us all the time, and we feel like we have friends everywhere, it's this virtual reality, which is not actual reality, it's virtual. What comes from this is actually that young people feel extremely lonely. This is the data. They don't really feel connected. Look at that jump. 2012 on, it has skyrocketed in loneliness, which has led to things like depression, anxiety, suicide, where these young people say frequently, I feel alone. That is not a good thing. They also are not sleeping. These devices, video games too, I'm not really talking much about video games this morning, but it fits this as well. I mean, they are designed and geared to wrap you into them. When I played a video game when I was a kid, we had a Nintendo. That's the only thing we ever had. But it was typically sports games. Or, Super Mario Brothers, you play a level, you beat the level, right? The game ends at a certain point. Just understand, and anybody with, again, kids, you know this, the games never end. Whatever the game is now, Fortnite or whatever, Minecraft, they don't ever end. So, okay, whenever you get to a stopping point, turn it off. There is no stopping point. It is built to keep them going and wrap them up in what's happening. This is the way, and it comes from marketing and advertising techniques that places like Facebook and Google, they are now taking advantage of you and your mind. And this has now found its way into all sorts of other things, our phones and video games, where the goal is to keep people on them as much as possible because that's what helps revenue from the ads that are being paid for so that you will see them and then react to them. It is, in many ways, just completely unfair, the way it's geared to affect your mind. And it is done on purpose. But because of that, sleep levels, sleep deprivation, which leads to all sorts of other problems, is a huge factor now. And remember, we're not just talking about teenagers. How many of us adults also get in bed and start the infinite scroll? Social media is an addiction. It is an addiction that presents itself neurologically, much like other addictions, like cocaine or heroin. It affects the regions of the brain in a very similar way. You just like that feeling, the dopamine hit that comes from getting the likes and the comments on the things that you post or the pictures that you see. All of that, it is geared to affect your brain, and it is all done on purpose. It is slowing down even the way that we think. the death of thought, right? We don't think very well. Have you had this experience maybe where you've been on your phone and you're scrolling and you're like, I have done nothing for the last 30 minutes or an hour? Those of you who sit at a desk and work like I do, I have to take a lot of measures, right? I'll like set things, and ironically, on my phone, like timers and things like that. So if I have work to do, I got to set that thing, turn it over, make sure I don't look at it, because notifications are constantly getting you to get distracted from what you're doing, right? And so we have to be proactive to make sure we're not getting distracted. And there's all kinds of, Cal Newport wrote a book, a couple different books about it. He wrote one called Digital Minimalism that I try to listen to once a year if I can. I would suggest doing that. Just giving tips and techniques like go to a coffee shop and leave your phone in the car. Actually get some work done without distraction. I mean, these are the measures that we have to take now because of the way our brain is affected by phones, by social media, by the apps. Also, all the apps are geared in the same way to keep you engaged and to keep you from disengaging from the content. And so what I want you to understand is there's all kinds of research done on this, that evidence, empirical evidence shown through data that this is what's happening to us and it affects us spiritually. That's where we're headed with this. When I preached this sermon at home, it was interesting. I put this slide on the screen and everybody started laughing. Now, you don't know me very well, and you're probably not as comfortable with what I'm doing, and so I saw some interesting looks when this went up here, but the reality is this is very real, and so you feel it. Even those of us who are older, we understand exactly what this picture is showing. That rather than actually having quality time with our spouse or with our kids, we are actually distracted. Many times in ways we don't even understand. Actually, evidence shows that adults underestimate how often they look at their phone by half. We actually pick our phones up and look at them 2 times more than we think that we do. The brain created social media, Siegel says. Now social media shapes the brain. Cultural experiences sent out over mass media reshape the actual structure of the brain. Now, there's a lot we don't know about the brain because the brain is complex, but one thing that we do know now, and it has been known for quite some time in the realms of psychology and sociology, is the idea of neuroplasticity, right? Your brain can shift and it can change. Even with things like addiction, over time, it takes years sometimes to kind of rework those neural pathways, but it can happen. But it's actually what's happening with smartphones, these devices, with social media. It's actually shaping your brain in a certain direction, and then this is the way that you go. When I grew up, I was in Vermont. We had 10 acres, and 8 of them were woods, and 2 were, just area I had to mow. But my dad, he at one point took a weed eater and went out and cut a path through the woods. We had a campsite that we built, back in the woods pretty far. And whenever we went back there, he only did that one time. That I remember, the entire time we lived there. He cut this path out with a weed eater, and then he never had to do it again. You know why? Because that's the path we always took. This was a long yard. We could have gone all kinds of directions. And sometimes when we were maybe playing hide and seek or something, we would. But most of the time, we would go down this one path. And so going down that path, it just cut that path out, and it was always there. When you're happy, where do you go? When you're sad, what do you do? When you're tired, when you're exhausted, what's your move? What path do you take? Well, I can tell you what the evidence shows. It shows that people in all those circumstances take out their phone and start scrolling. And rather than having human interaction, this path gets cut out more and more and more. Newport says humans are not wired to be constantly wired. This is sort of how he concludes one of his sections. This is not the way. This is not the way we're supposed to be functioning. And yet our minds are being warped and reshaped, and we need to be aware of it. We need to understand the good parts of whatever technology we're looking at, but also we need to be aware and awake to the negatives, able to counteract them. We have to think about what we can do. And thankfully now, as this has progressed over time, more work has gone into how we can handle this. Actually, younger generations are very attuned to this. There's movements within some of our young people to get off of screens, get off of technology. They're getting it in many ways more than their parents and their grandparents because they see the influence and they see the impact in their friends. But there is a spiritual element to this. Paul talks about being able to tear down every arrogant obstacle, everything that is raised against the knowledge of God. And I can tell you what, me scrolling my Facebook and scrolling Instagram, it is taking away from spiritual things I can be doing. What about you? I have to recognize this in myself. There's so much wasted time. There's so many things that rise up against what is actually good and wholesome. Things I should be thinking about that is wasted thinking about things that don't matter. And I get it. We all need downtime. There's always, it's okay to sometimes sit and do nothing and watch a show. I mean, we need rest at times and relaxation. So I'm not saying we can't ever do that. But when we binge watch a show on Netflix for hours and hours and hours, or we sit scrolling and infinite scrolling, you've seen the same picture 3 times now over the last hour, something is wrong. And it is taking away from things that are truly beneficial that we actually need. And as Paul says, we need to take every thought captive and make it obey Christ. Now, some of this is just happening on the personal level with me and with you. Me making decisions that I'm going to take my thoughts captive. I'm going to do things that are beneficial, that are worthwhile. I'm not going to just waste my life away scrolling on a screen or looking at a screen. And we may have some more things to say about this later on in the week, particularly in the area of discipleship, because I think we've missed out in many ways, and I know Josh probably is doing some work on this. I think he told me he is on discipleship and on spiritual disciplines and things that could actually really help us focus and prioritize what actually matters in life, and it's not our phones. And we know that. We know it intellectually. But our practices sometimes don't demonstrate it, do they? So what can we do? Well, this is pretty big picture. I'm not going to dig into details at the moment. We only have 10 minutes left, so we can't really do that right now. But I just want to cover some basic ideas, maybe some overarching principles in our life that can help us maybe in one moment or a next. You find yourself too engrossed in your phone. What can you do? What are the big picture thoughts? And a lot of this I thought through really just to help myself. I saw it in myself. I saw it in my family. And like many of you, we have rules in place in our home, like phones don't go upstairs or they're plugged in at certain times of day because we just recognized the devastation of what was happening in our own family because people were on devices constantly. But this is even more bigger picture than that. I want us to think on a principle level, on an ethical level. How to help our minds in that moment think through this correctly. The first thing that we can do, and we can teach our children, a lot of our children aren't in here this morning, but we can begin to reinforce these ideas with them, is that people are more important than devices. We need to prioritize the people in our lives. All right, Philippians 2 talks about this, going back to the earlier part of this letter we read in chapter 4. But he talks about putting others' interests before our own, not doing things for selfish ambition or conceit, about in humility, counting others more significant than yourselves. Now, he's dealing with some broad areas there that aren't precisely what we're talking about. But I do think it's important to get the idea of what he's saying here about realizing the importance of the people around us. I probably don't need to check my stock portfolio for the 18th time when somebody's talking to me, right, having a conversation. Now, ESPN.com is not that important. I'm sitting here talking to a friend or we're eating lunch together. It probably doesn't need to be the time that I pull my phone out. Just think about the message that sends. Have you been there? You're with a friend or with family and there's discussion happening and someone pulls their phone out and they're scrolling. And again, we all understand sometimes there's work-related things or emails that have to be looked at. And so this is part of the problem, right? Sometimes things do need to happen, but that can very easily then morph into things that really aren't important. And so while my friend or my wife is talking to me instead of actually paying attention to them, they're looking at this, right? You're familiar with this? Actually, when I preached this at home, that's how I started. I just started preaching and I just looked at my phone the whole time I was talking. And of course, again, everybody started laughing. They get it. This is our culture. It doesn't feel very good, does it? It doesn't feel like that person really cares much about you. Now, you may know they do, and I think we understand at times they really do. They're being pulled in by something and they don't know how it looks. But remember this principle. It's a principle within Scripture all over the place. I mean, Philippians is just one area to look at this. But the way we interact with one another and the way we care for one another, this is more important than the meaningless things that we are scrolling and looking at on our phones. Put the phone down during a meal and actually interact with people. This is a principle or an idea that is extremely important, even in our spiritual growth. One of the things I love about where I'm at in Decker Prairie, it's just such an amazing atmosphere with the people there and the way they love each other and the way they do things together. And of course, we're not perfect, but I've been there a little over 5 years now, and just the engagement that takes place. We have some people there who are some of the best conversationalists I've ever known. They interact with you and they ask questions about you and what's happening in your life. And I try to help my kids see this. I'll even tell them, do you notice how this person interacts with people? They aren't looking at their phone. They're not engaged with others. They're not distracted. When they're talking to you, they're talking to you. And you're who they care about at that moment. Learn from that. See how important it is to prioritize people, and this does matter. We've had some people in recent years converted because of the interaction. People, it matters how you treat people around you. This is a biblical principle. And they see this high engagement, they see the true compassion and care that comes from a person, and they say, hey, come to our house, we're having people over, why don't you come? They just met this person. And they come, and there's a group of people there engaging with them, truly interested in their life. And they say, I want to be like those people. It matters. But if they encounter a bunch of zombies looking at their phone, that's not impressive. A bunch of people who are prioritizing looking at this media and this app and that app, even though they've looked at it 50 times already today, instead of actually engaging with the person right in front of them, that sends a message. A 13-year-old from Houston, Texas, who was part of Twangy's study, said, I think we like our phones more than we like actual people. The number of teens who get together with friends nearly every day dropped by more than 40% from 2000 to 2015. Now, I want you to keep in mind, our young people don't know this. They've grown up in this world. They don't know what it was like back in 2000. They don't know the type of engagement, how people used to interact. They're just not aware of that. All they know is what they've seen here, but the data tells you the story. People just aren't engaged anymore. And our young people don't spend time together anywhere near like they used to be spending time together. God's people are meant to live connected to each other. God created us as social creatures. And actually, these devices can be tools sometimes for that. We can text each other or call or email, but none of that's going to replace face-to-face connection. Yeah, when I'm away from my wife, sometimes we'll FaceTime or we'll text. We'll send pictures to each other of things that we're doing or whatever. How do you think she would feel, though, if I was like, this is great. We've had some great conversations and FaceTime. I'm just going to stay here in Florence, and we're just going to call each other every day and FaceTime and interact. Pretty sure she would not be happy with that. I wouldn't either. Because we know it's not real, right? I mean, this is just a temporary tool, and it's great. When my dad was in India, he would go for 6 weeks. And back then, I don't even know how this functioned. It's like how our young people don't know how things used to be, like I just mentioned. I mean, I was a little kid. It's like a cable line that runs to the ocean or something. I don't know. But he had to go find some phone, and then we would talk every 3 weeks. I mean, that was it. When I went to Romania, again, I was on a video call with my little kids. Every single day I could do that. And so it is amazing. And technology is great, but it doesn't replace reality. And we need to understand the importance of prioritizing the people in our lives. We need to be people who pursue joy. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. If there's one thing I can point out about all of this that we need to be impressed upon in our minds when we walk away this morning, it is that this technology does not produce joy. It just doesn't. Now, Silicon Valley, and I did some work with some people out there for a while on something that this is something we probably aren't even familiar with. The atmosphere out there is that technology is salvation. It's the answer, right? And person after person ends up being let down. They give their life to that. They start working at Google or one of these places, and then they realize in the end it's empty. It's not actually going to be the answer. And so this is a real thing. They worship it almost like a god. And the church out there that I was doing some stuff with, this was one of the things they were considering as part of their outreach, their evangelism, is this nature of the culture that they lived in that area. They wanted to focus on real purpose and real meaning and how you find that. And you don't find it in technology. You want to rejoice in the Lord, it's not going to happen from looking at your phone a lot. That is just not the case. Tingy says this, there is not a single exception. All screen activities are linked to less happiness, and all non-screen activities are linked to more happiness. I want you to hear it again. Not a single exception. All screen activities are linked to less happiness. There is a sacrifice being made. Big picture principle, right? Sometimes we need technology for our work or whatever, but we have to understand there is a sacrifice. They are all linked to less joy. Don't be deceived in thinking that more time on a screen or watching a movie or whatever, sometimes those things help our brains calm down or whatever, but don't think it's going to make you more happy. It will not make you more happy. It will not make you more joyous. We are depressing ourselves. And we need to be people who, again, big picture, are planning to think, to reason, to work through ideas, big ideas, details, right? And we have to work back and forth. There's a tension between those. You see the overview, and then you dig in and you look at the details. And we can't do that when our minds are distracted constantly with everything around us. Perhaps we should take more seriously the biblical precedent to meditate. In our text this morning, we'll look at in the worship hour, it mentions a couple times that Jesus withdrew, went to a place by himself. He had solitude and silence. He wasn't even dealing with smartphones and devices. But even then, he realized the need to get away and to let his mind be renewed. Maybe we should follow him. We need to have a plan for getting rid of distractions, getting rid of the hurry and the busyness of life. And maybe if you aren't convinced still about the problems with these devices, let me give you some more information. 8th graders who are heavy users of social media increase their risk of depression by 27%. While those who play sports, go to religious activities, and religion is huge. You're protecting yourself just by the fact that you were religious. There's a book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Excellent book. He's not a believer, but he actually has a whole section on spirituality because it is so helpful. So things are happening right here that in and of themselves are protecting you from some of this. Keep that in mind. People who are religious or even do homework more than the average teen, they cut their risk significantly. Teens who spend 3 hours a day or more on electronic devices are 35% more likely to have a risk factor for suicide. 48% more girls said they often felt left out in 2015 than in 2010. 57% more teens were sleep deprived in 2015 than 1991. Look, wars, massive economic events, all of these things were nothing in the generational information. But you know what was? This. It is doing devastating things to people and to their mental health and to their spirituality. Devices and social media seem to have an especially strong ability to disrupt sleep. Sleep deprivation is linked to a myriad of issues, including compromised thinking, right? The death of thought. We're so tired we can't even think. And reasoning, illness, weight gain, high blood pressure, depression, anxiety, and it goes on. And so when we read texts like Romans chapter 12, where it talks about being transformed, not being conformed to the world, but being transformed by the renewing of our mind, remember how that applies to this. We aren't renewing our minds here. We're destroying them. And we need to be aware of the effects of this. And our bodies matter. He says to present our bodies as living sacrifices. How am I presenting my body? This is the kind of question I need to ask and think through as a child of God. I appreciate your attention this morning. I know that was a lot of information, but I hope in some way it's helpful. Helpful as parents, as grandparents, to think about the importance of some of the cultural things we have going around and how they're influencing us and in some ways negatively affecting us spiritually. Thank you.